Okay, so Token Drop episode 12. And today we have a very special guest, Werner Goertz. Werner and I have known each other for a number of years, as has Sajat. Sajat and Werner worked together, and I think, Werner, I was your customer at a previous company. And I'll give you a little bit of background on him. He's founder of Anicca AR Agent Relations. He was formerly a analyst at Gartner, formerly was at AWS and IBM as analyst relations leader, knows that whole AI space extremely well. Would you like to mention anything more about your company before we get started, Werner?
I think you summarized it perfectly. We live in a very exciting time of inflection now in the AI space. And yeah, look forward to this discussion with you guys.
Yeah. You mentioned about Anicca. Sam was actually asking about that. Can you tell us what that means? I thought it was very lovely.
It is the Buddhist term for impermanence. Everything in life changes. And this is not only the life circumstances, but I thought it applied very much to the technology space that Anicca AR is in right now. And our observation is that it used to be that impermanence manifested itself on a monthly, quarterly, maybe annual basis, but the rate of change is getting shorter and shorter, and change and impermanence happens now, especially in our AI sector, almost on a daily basis.
Okay, so the reason we asked Werner on this call is really interesting because we were talking about some areas that were actually very relevant to what we had a podcast on the other day. We had talked about AI agent governance, and we approached it from a security, compliance, data protection standpoint. And Werner's point was, yeah, those are really important, but other aspects are also important. Like what knowledge are we creating? What workflows are producing values? What prompts should be standardized? That was one aspect. And another one that he brought up was that, you know, in in the enterprise, a lot of people are doing AI work individually. A salesperson will discover a prompt that helps them to be whatever 25%, 50% more effective in creating a proposal. Or a marketer might have a workflow that reduces campaign creation from hours to minutes, right? So that's all either in the mind of the employee or on their laptop. And how can organizations take that and make it more broadly spread? They do that for other things, non-AI stuff. How can they do it for AI stuff? So I thought we'd kick off the conversation on those two areas. Before I do, our standard disclaimer, all opinions are that of the individual and not necessarily the company that they work for or represent. So, Werner, what do you think?
Well said. And in my opinion, 2026 is the year of many, many inflection points. And the various points that you mentioned to me are all manifestations of the inflection in AI, in enterprise AI, where we are at the crossroads. In the past, individuals created prompts on their individual, ChatGPT, Claude accounts, and created really interesting value. At the end of the day, though, the way these AI agents are set up, you bring individual accounts, you bring an individual chat history into the enterprise. What happens if the employee gets hit by a bus or goes and joins the other company across the street? All of that prompt history, all of that context knowledge, and all of the outcomes of this AI work leaves the company without having created institutional knowledge. So the inflection point here is that what governance criteria, what AI management criteria must the enterprise create in order to ensure that all of this value that's created by individuals' use of AI stays with the company and is at the end of the day contributive to the IP, to the intellectual property of that company. So that is one of the inflection points that we need, that enterprises need to be able to address. The next question is, who's going to do it? Who's going to be the responsible entity? What institution within the enterprise is going to be held responsibility for institutional IP creation? That's what customers come to me with my fractional and ask for fractional AI leadership guidance. And this is what we bring to the enterprise, the ability to create guardrails, not only for regulatory compliance, but governance guardrails that ensures that AI is used in the enterprise in a responsible way and in an effective way, but also in a way that contributes to enterprise intellectual property as a whole, and that ensures that all the creativity, all the productivity that AI enables stays with the company.
This is really interesting because every company I've ever worked at, there's always been a move to make some of the software that they have as modular IP that can be used in terms of put into a library that other groups in the organization can use. Great idea, lovely, right? Why reinvent the wheel? But the challenge has been getting humans to do that or to first put it in and other humans to want to go look for that information from the library versus build it themselves. It seems like a lot of that will also apply
Great
to
start.
AI.
Great example, because software development over the decades of the preceding decades has all been about enabling teams. Some
Yeah.
software actually was named Teams for that precise reason, because it was the software foundation, the software enablement to leverage individual creativity for the benefit of team collaboration and enterprise IP. Along come these AI tools, which all of a sudden have individual user accounts. The chat in history is at the individual's level. If you look at things like truly beneficial, revolutionary things like Claude Cowork, the data sources for co-work projects resides not only at the individual's level, but at the individual's device level. The Claude Co-work asks in this instantiation for data sources sitting in folders on your individual laptop. Again, if you get hit by a bus or you decide to go to the competition, that laptop gets erased along with all of the beneficial things that you have contributed to the organization. And so, in decades of enterprise productivity software development that were always teams oriented, enterprise oriented, now we find ourselves with tools that are primarily designed for personal productivity. And that's the challenge.
What do you think, Sajat and Sam?
Yeah, I think I was going to say I acknowledge what Werner is alluding to. I think we're beginning to move, or rather, how do we move enterprises from the centralized, standardized workflows and processes that imposed upon employees what they do and how they do their work? And everything else that the employee came up with, new ideas, new ways of selling or new ways of building, remained that knowledge remained with that individual. And despite all efforts to say, hey, why don't you write a blog about it? Or why don't you write a how-to about it and then push it into the central enterprise repositories, you're literally fighting an uphill battle. It's really hard to aggregate knowledge by getting people to do something more. So, and now I think the arrival of LLMs and more so agentic architectures allow us that unique opportunity to stitch together enterprise knowledge into a fabric that spans what resides as the enterprise core knowledge in those centralized databases, but also reach out to departments and groups, work groups, even individuals, and find a way to integrate and aggregate their knowledge into this fabric. So this fabric ends up becoming the enterprise's core key differentiating element. It was always known that what uniquely differentiates a company, the single most important asset, competitive asset, is your knowledge. But it was really hard to manifest it. It was hard to materialize it. And I think we are now at that inflection point when you can actually do so. And if you reflect back on our work, Sunil, what we are trying to do is knowledge aggregation, knowledge processing.
Correct.
So we're constructing these graphs of knowledge, and we now have the unique ability to stitch together islands of knowledge, again linked together by appropriate linkages in those graphs. And these graphs will learn from user interactions, and they also subsume enterprise knowledge as was stored in those centralized repositories. So then I think what you're doing now is you're getting enterprises to double down on building their knowledge, even as they pay these outside tools, which is an LLM from one service provider or the other. You're simply using those tools to aggregate and build a knowledge assets.
So
So
glad
that's
you picked up on my term of inflection, because that is another inflection point that we're going to be seeing in 2026. Right. So the centralization, the institutionalization of the AI platform, complete with the institutionalization of the role of the AI leader across all aspects, across all stakeholders of the enterprise, is the first step.
I think so.
Where in the past you had individuals bringing their AI workloads to the enterprise. Maybe you had business units aggregating at the BU level, at the team level, collaborating there. Enterprises now are moving up the value chain and institutionalizing the role of the AI leader. Now, some people, some enterprises call this CAIO, the Chief AI Officer. Some call it a Chief Data and Analytics Officer. Whatever the name is, it's important to realize that this centralization, institutionalization, has to happen close or at the C level of the organization, so that it has a bird's eye view of all aspects that AI touches in the organization. And I have difficulty finding parts of the organization today that are not touched by AI. So first step is to appoint a structural organizational construct that aggregates all of these things. And the second thing is to use technologies like you mentioned, Sajjad, that is able to aggregate, store, and leverage the entire enterprise's knowledge history, whether that's through graphs, whether that's through ontologies, and whether that is through platform-oriented tool sets. Those are implementation details.
Yes.
But these are the things that we're going to be seeing for the rest of 2026, the institutionalization, and then at the operational level, the aggregation of tools and data science technologies.
That calls for a huge shift, right? So far in an enterprise, we've been dealing with data, right? We talk about data and data processing and data assets. It's a big shift from going from data to knowledge, and building knowledge tools, curating knowledge, knowledge management, knowledge engineering, and fusing knowledge from different domains as guided by that particular business's core specialty. If you're a medical device company, you might have medical device ontologies, but you also have sales functions, you have finance functions, you have operations functions and manufacturing functions. How do you find a way to integrate all of that knowledge through a common integration layer that allows you to fuse all of this knowledge and work across this knowledge that then sets the base for orchestrating and operating integrated workflows that can do some of these things autonomously.
Like that you say integrated workflows, because previously you had all of these workflows be executed, number one, in silos, and number two, in a totally deterministic way.
Yes.
Right? So the R&D department developed a product or service that was based on algorithmic functions that developed a deterministic outcome. So did the legal department. So did finance. Now we have the opportunity to aggregate all of this data and see a holistic and probabilistic view of the entire corporation and create applications out of this data that transcends the original silos and that transcends individual deterministic outcomes and look at the business as a whole in a more strategic way.
Indeed, really, this allows you to then translate the CEO's objectives into ripple through work actions and workflows for everyone in the enterprise.
Yeah, I'm wondering,
So
sorry, Werner, go ahead.
I just wanted to paint a picture of three maturity stages of AI use within an organization. It usually starts with customers who are coming to me and who are asking, how can we institutionalize AI comprehensively in the organization? The outcome here is, the objective here is to create efficiencies, but efficiencies across existing workflows, existing company paradigms. That is stage number one, institutionalizing. Stage number two that I see is the productization of AI, infusing AI workflows into product development or services development. This transcends those silos, Sajjad, that you were talking about earlier on, right? This means that product people are involved, finance people are involved, legal people are involved for compliance reasons. And productizing AI is the next step in that maturity evolution. And then once you have that holistic view of the enterprise, once you take into account strategic value, strategic assets of the company at the CEO level, you'll be able to identify totally new markets, totally new market opportunities that nobody has penetrated before. White spaces where your company assets, your company ontology will suggest what white spaces, totally disruptive new business opportunities exist within the market space. And you can use, I like to use the term, I've been criticized for this, weaponizing AI. Using AI to identify white spaces, to penetrate adjacencies and white spaces, and to fortify and to defend these against entrance. So these three stages of maturity in AI adoption are the ones that I see.
Indeed.
I have
Sorry,
a
Kinwal.
friend who works for, sorry, Sam, you want to say something?
So what I wanted to ask Werner is this. Uh, Knowledge graphs, all shuttle, graph rack are the substrate for institutional AI specifically, right? They are model agnostic, provenance bearing, governed and queryable in a real sense. In that architecture, LLM is a replaceable lobe, I would say that actually, right? The institutional knowledge graph is the persistent asset you are talking about, right? So are you saying enterprise AI sells the lobe, institutional AI builds the asset? Is that the point actually?
So I think what Werner was
This
saying
asset,
is, go ahead, Werner, sorry.
go ahead, Sajid.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Sam, really what we're talking about is aggregating, concentrating enterprise knowledge
Yeah,
as an abstract entity. And
correct.
how you manifest that, you might use an LLM, you might have some graphs, you
Exactly.
might have an ontology to guide all of that. the technology and implementation could change, and that's a running treadmill. So you have some means of representing knowledge today that might change tomorrow. But and at a conceptual level, what I think Werner has been referring to is how can you build a flywheel that is continuously adding to the enterprise knowledge
Correct.
that spans all functions, and that ends up becoming what you curate, what you govern, what you use as a core enterprise differentiator. Use that as a means of defense, use that as a means of offense, use that as a means and as a vehicle for innovation, everything you do in an enterprise.
Yeah, exactly. I
Very well
understood what
said,
you were trying to
Sajjad.
say in terms of what is captured, structured, governed, version, and made curable. Like it survives people, products, any model change, and compounds over time, right? I mean, I see the institutional AI part of it, and then I also see the enterprise AI part of it. The two different things, right? And from what I see from his ideas is we need some structured model of the business. That's the ontology part of it. There is a governance or contract layer, which can do what with what authority and kind of that stuff. Those questions can come in, and then there's a record of agent actions, actually, right? I mean, so in other words, overall, the point there is how do we really institutionalize that overall body of knowledge, actually? I mean, that's very important, I think,
Right.
actually.
It's not a discipline that exists today, come to think of it, right? We talk about data management, they talk about data life cycles and protecting data, reporting from data. Not too many people speak about knowledge curation. What is knowledge as a unit? And what is the provenance of that knowledge as a unit? How do you store knowledge? How do you process knowledge? That discipline is a little less known.
Yeah.
The one concept that I would add to that is the organic and ever-changing, back to my point of Anicca, right? The ever-changing nature of this organic entity. Because what you have today is not what you're going to have tomorrow. It does not manifest in one single monolithic LLM. Au contraire, right? What you will build out over time is a continuum of multiple foundational entities, contributors, some of which will be generally adversarial, GAN networks, right? So imagine a workflow where you build something with the help of specialist LLMs that you have trained on specific tasks. But then to keep that original workflow honest, you introduce another uh, foundational entity, another LLM maybe, or some other form that in a GAN sort of way um, um, tests and probes the outcome of the first one for compliance, for correctness, for hallucination, for this is just an example. So what I think I'm proposing here is exactly what Sajjad said: an organic and ever-changing continuum portfolio of different technologies, including but not limited to LLMs, that will comprehensively govern the enterprise and govern itself.
So
Like
this adversarial, isn't that just a verifier?
it's
What's called a
it's one of
verifier
the
nowadays?
it's one of the verifiers, indeed. In fact, to extend what Werner is saying is like in a human brain, when you go to sleep at night, the processes that kick in that take your short-term memories and store them as long-term memories if required. Otherwise, if they're of not much value, even wipe them out all clean. And all of the knowledge is integrated and aggregated as you sleep, as your biological processes actually perform all of these actions in your brain at night. That's why you need rest. So this is what these machines, these systems will be doing all day long, unlike a human being who needs to rest to allow these things to happen. An enterprise never rests. These things are working all through day and night, organizing knowledge, checking and verifying accuracy of that knowledge, establishing lineage. Where did it come from? Is this the correct source of knowledge? Are there conflicts, right? And are there any access controls and limitations? And who should have access to this knowledge? Who should not have access to this knowledge? Have you done knowledge fusion accurately across manufacturing and R&D and legal? Have you
Right.
fused that correctly enough? So it's literally like a living entity that's continuously refining itself and increasingly improving your competitive positioning.
We highlight the self-improving factor here because generative adversarial networks, these GANs, were originally seen like as a maybe precursor or as a step towards a more AGI goal at the end of the roadmap, right? Whether or not AGI, let's not get into that discussion. But the GAN concept also not only implies editorial control of one entity over the other, it implies ping pong. It implies that concepts get bounced back and forth and continuously improve that way. A person whom I met at Duke University not too long ago at the Fuqua School of Business developed an LLM that was designed to be contrarian. Very simple process. She developed an LLM and made that available in a very simple process. The objective of this LLM was just to be contrarian, to test out theses against that LLM, and that LLM would purposefully design an output that would question your original prompt. I found this to be incredibly helpful,
Yeah.
not in a sense of who's right or who's wrong, but in the sense of this ping pong effect of going back and forth and continuously refining your original thesis so that with each iteration it becomes more substantiated and more founded and
battle
more
tested. Yeah.
sustainable and arguable.
In fact, and there's a famous professor of computer science at UCLA, Julia Pearl. About 6, 7 years ago, he wrote a book called The Book of Why. And one of the arguments that Julia Pearl makes is neural networks are really good at correlation, right? If you see a ball and it dropped, you would correlate that with gravity and say, yeah, maybe it was gravity that actually pulled it down, right? But how do you establish causation? How do you establish causation and then counterfactuals, right? What if this event did not occur? What would have happened, right? To be able to reason with counterfactuals, to be able to establish causation, you have to go well beyond the capabilities of today's LLMs. And these are the capabilities that reasoning systems that know how to operate on knowledge can actually help deliver. So that, I mean, it just speaks to the ability you're talking about, right? How do you continuously refine and strengthen, battle test your knowledge with adversarial scenarios and continuously refine that to be even more distilled, even more relevant to your business needs?
So is it
Interesting.
in a way generative? Actually, the institutional AI is generative, right? Because it builds things. So enterprise AI is extractive, but institutional AI is more generative in its nature, from what I'm seeing, actually, from what you're talking, right? I mean, because it prunes these and builds on top of that, right? I mean, and comes to I mean, what it holistically looks at that and improves upon it over time, right? I mean, what were the things that were done, how it's done, etc. And so I'm seeing more the notion that this whole idea of how do you do the governance and how do you build this whole notion of institutional AI that itself holistically looks like a generative process to me, actually.
Not necessarily. Actually, the generative process can mean predictive, like the LLM generating something, and you don't know whether it's correct or not. And that's not what we're speaking about. What we're speaking about is you're synthesizing knowledge, and this knowledge that you're synthesizing factoids of knowledge and assembling them as like a jigsaw puzzle, right? Complete entire jigsaw puzzle. It's logically integrated. It fits well together. It presents a cohesive picture. There is no scope of error. There's no scope of predictive errors. probabilistic errors, and you want this to be the defining knowledge that you can depend on for making business decisions, running your business, running operations within the business right across the enterprise.
There's no doubt in my mind that this institutional knowledge will have strong generative impact
Yeah,
and generative efficiencies. But the real fun starts when you use it in a more agentic context.
correct.
Because here you will be able to fact check. You will be able to harness it will be able to harness its own capabilities to make sure that, for instance, a concrete example, model drift, right? It will observe its own outcomes drifting away from the guardrails originally set forth and will be able to self-correct. It will be able to control blast radius of agentic functions. One problem today is we can let agentic AI loose on the world and create millions of emails, but what if an error occurs, a fatal error occurs? What can we do to stop it? What is the blast radius of something going wrong? Nobody knows really, right?
Yep.
So the real fun with this institutional ontology, this institutional knowledge and workflow base starts when it can address some of the implicit difficulties that even we as humans are struggling with. For instance, governance, model drift, blast radius, AI security, runaway AI, if you will. So that is where this institutional embedding of AI really starts to take shape.
That Duke LLM is one I'd never use, the contrarian one, because I've worked with a couple of people like that, and it just drove me nuts. Whatever I said, if I said A, they said B. If I said up, they say down. And it just was just too difficult to work with. And these guys probably trained that LLM. Like I said, it
Yes,
drove me nuts.
it's really a fun exercise to go through
Yeah,
because it forces you um, uh, to conduct a platonic dialogue with yourself.
I can't reach out and strangle them like I wanted to, right? So, this whole discussion about knowledge becoming IP is making an analogy to something I've seen in the Valley, where I've got a friend who works for IP licensing for a big company here in the Valley. They are building their own chips, and he helps to license some of that chip IP to other customers because it's not a core competency. This idea of taking AI, for example, a prompt or whatever, a workflow, and making it an IP could then be resold by that company just like this chip IP, couldn't they? They could monetize this because it may not be a core competency, but it's extremely valuable, and somebody would pay for it. So it
Yes.
seems like
So
that,
let me give you an example
yeah.
that I had a conversation, very interesting conversation with the other day. It's one of those travel information platforms. Decades ago, Amadeus came out with this travel information platform, and basically that was the source of all your flight data and hotels, etc. And it is a good case study for those three stages of maturity that I mentioned earlier on. So you could treat flight information, this database of flight information, as creating efficiencies, AI creating efficiencies by just prompting that database or that LLM of flight data. Second, you could go a step further because Sunil, you just mentioned a company could go and sell this platform
Yeah,
as IP.
absolutely.
Secondarily, you could productize this AI, right? You could make applications. I'm a United flyer, so I have United.com. Infuse that with AI, and you make it productized. But here's where your point comes in, Sunil. You could take the entire platform and create a new application and a new industry, right? So imagine how powerful this concept would be if somebody like an Amadeus or a Sabre would create its own ontology based on the data sets that it has, create an ontology that all of a sudden disintermediates the Travelocities or the Expedias of this world. That is an example of the weaponization of AI that I mentioned earlier on to totally define new markets and to totally disrupt entire industries that will soon become legacy.
And I would imagine, I mean, if you extend that argument further, there are roughly about 8 billion people on planet Earth. Everyone brings something unique, and you specialize in the uniqueness that you bring to the table. And this kind of knowledge fabric kind of synthesizes everybody's knowledge into a single unified fabric. And then you have somebody who's really specialized in manufacturing. If Apple specializes in manufacturing at mass volumes, there is no good reason why an Android phone has to retain its own manufacturing facilities, right? It could use Apple's manufacturing facilities, but then specialize in its own uniqueness, right? So then you have just manufacturing companies that just do manufacturing. There are design companies that just design new products. So I mean, it kind of opens up the economy for anyone who's talented, who has some special skills, to contribute their own skills and compete on the basis of their own capabilities, unique talents.
So
We're
I think
so
we've
used
almost,
to vertical integration. What you're proposing now is vertical disintermediation.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly.
correct. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
okay, so I think we're
Think
almost out
about
of
the disruptive
time.
power of it.
Sorry, Werner, just go ahead, please. Finish up.
I just wanted to reaffirm Sajad's notion of this vertical disintermediation. Think of the efficiencies created there, but also think about the problems it would generate because we are now living in a world of a global supply chain, right? Think about that we have enough of geopolitical stuff going on as it is. Do we want do Sajad? Do you want to disrupt the global supply chain with your concept of of vertical disintermediation? If so, the consequences will be on you, and we will blame you.
I would argue the
We know where you
counterfactual
live.
the counterfactual argument to this would be maybe those global conflicts will not exist. Yes, everyone is so interdependent on everyone else that you really collaborate and make this work.
Okay, so
Macroeconomic geopolitical trends point to the opposite, but let's not go there.
that's for next week's podcast. Okay, well, a pleasure as always, Werner. Thank you so much. If you could hang out, and we appreciate your time.
This has been so much fun. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.